Hello everyone, Simon here. Uh, I want to do a little bit, I want to do something a little bit different. I want to talk about psychology and neuroscience, right? So usually I do gaming stuff, but I think this is important. I think psychology is important. I think neuroscience is important. And I think it's one of these important things that people don't understand enough about, right? Um, People don't talk enough about psychology, I think. Now, and that might seem a little strange to you, because I mean, if you never talk about it, why would I want to talk about it, right? It's because your brain is you, man. Like you are your brain. So here's a brain. Look at that. Pretty cool, right? You are your brain, and a lot of people don't understand their own brains. Well, I think they don't understand enough about their own brains. It's because when I talk to people, often they say, "Oh, that so and so did something, and it's kind of really weird." Right? Or, I just can't get along with that guy. I don't, right? Because you have to understand how they think. Like, your interpersonal relationships is your brain and their brain, and you're not understanding their brain, and they're not understanding your brain. And I think this causes so much conflict and so much like unnecessary complications because people don't understand each other. And people don't understand themselves either. They get in trouble, they feel bad, or they feel sometimes they feel happy and they don't understand why. So like there's a lot of things that I think would make you more successful if you understood yourself better, if you understand your brain better. So that's my motivation for making these videos. I don't know how well they do. I don't know how well I do. But I just want to talk about psychology and neuroscience and just do like a basic, I'm going to say basic overview, but it's going to be a lot of videos. Just talking about how your brain works. Because I think it's important. I really do think it's important. And if nobody watches these, well, too bad, right? No harm done. If somebody watches these and they learn something about how their brain works and it helps them in their life, that's great, right? That's what I want to do. So what we're looking at is there's a model of a brain, a 3D model of a brain hosted on neurotorium.org, funded by the Lundbeck Foundation. So these guys do brain research, and I'm just borrowing their brain model, right? I don't know anything about these guys. I'm just borrowing their brain model because it's pretty good, right? You can look around, there's your brain, and then you can like, oh, cut the brain open and see like a section of the brain. You can section this way, you can section this way, you can section from the front. Oh, very cool. Or alternatively, you can like go inside the brain, right? You can go inside and you can see inside the brains. You can see the bits on the outside, bits on the inside, right down to there. So that's the inside of your brain. So very cool model, and we're going to use this a lot. We're going to find all these pieces, right? Prefrontal cortex, premotor cortex, precentral gyrus. So all the stuff, we're going to look all this stuff up. And also, I'm going to use Google Gemini. So I'm going to be asking the AI to teach us about neuroscience. Because I'm not an expert in neuroscience, but AI these days, they know a lot of stuff. So we're going to ask Gemini. This is Gemini 3 Flash Thinking. If you know anything about AI, that would make sense to you. If you don't know anything about AI, that doesn't mean anything. It's Google Gemini, basically. It's a new one as of December 2025. All right. So let's get into it. I've started off already to make sure that Gemini actually works. But I'm gonna basically, I'll be doing this live. I don't really have a fixed plan, but I kind of have some ideas about what I want to learn about or want you guys to learn about. And I'm just gonna, you know, have a conversation with Gemini. I'm gonna ask it questions. It's gonna give us answers, and we're gonna figure out the brain as we go. That's the plan. I hope it works. Okay, so starting off, I said to Gemini, I'm thinking about an educational course that introduces the neuroscience approach to psychology. The neuroscience approach to psychology. So we're talking about understanding the science of the brain and how that affects behavior, right? Before we dive into details, I thought it would be good to engage new students with a case study. Can you tell us the story of Phineas Gage in a way that is engaging and relatable to laypeople, while also introducing neuroscience concepts about how the brain determines behavior? So I know about Phineas Gage already. If you don't know anything about neuroscience, you might not have heard of this. But if you've studied neuroscience in any way at all, you would probably have heard about Phineas Gage. He's one of these textbook examples that every student needs to learn about if you study psychology or neuroscience or anything. So I'm going to start with the textbook example, and we'll see how we go from there, right? So Gemini replies, the story of Phineas Gage is perhaps the most famous accident in the history of science. I mean, that's maybe it is. It's a bit hyperbolic, but it is probably the most famous in the history of neuroscience. Let's put it that way. It's the moment we stopped thinking of the brain as just a mysterious sponge and started seeing it as a complex map where specific regions dictate who we are. That might be a little bit hyperbolic as well, but it's mostly right. Alright, so the man in the moment. In 1848, 25-year-old Phineas Gage was a foreman for a railroad construction crew in Vermont. He was well-liked, responsible, and considered a shrewd, smart businessman. So let's check the references to make sure that we got this right. Phineas Gage, 1848, right? Had an accident. He was 25-year-old. All right, so checks out. Good. Don't trust the AI automatically, right? Sometimes the AI gets things wrong, but it does give you references. One afternoon, Phineas was using a tamping iron, a 3-foot-long, 13-pound heavy metal rod, to pack gunpowder into a rock. So he's doing construction work. It's a railroad construction work, right? Yeah, railroad construction. He's packing gunpowder to blast open a rock. A stray spark ignited the powder, and the iron rod became a missile. It entered through his left cheek, traveled behind his left eye, and tore through the top of his skull before landing 40 feet away. So he's kind of tamping down the gunpowder, and as he's doing it, the gunpowder ignites, and the steel rod shoots up through his, in here, through the back of his eyeball, through his brain, and out the top of his skull, and just tore a hole through his brain. I wonder if we can get a picture of this. We might get a picture of this. So this is what it looked like afterwards. So he lost his eye, and it went in here and out the top. But this is much later, right? This is much later. And I think this is the tamping iron that went through his head. Like he's holding it. Yeah. So that's a later portrait. We don't have a picture there. I do believe this one gives us a picture. Ah, there it is. So here's a drawing of what happened. In here, through the back of the eyeball, through his brain, out the top. That's a drawing of what happened. Disastrous. You would think he would die, but the impossible survival. Miraculously, Gage didn't die. In fact, he was conscious and speaking within minutes. Miraculous. He even sat upright in an ox cart during the ride back to town and joked with the doctor, saying, "Here is business enough for you." Well, that's how they remember the quote. So he was alive, he was conscious, and he was talking. The thing went through his head, through his brain, and he's still talking. So it didn't hit anything that would immediately kill him. There are some parts of the brain that would immediately kill you. Like it would stop the part that controls your heartbeat, for example, and that would kill you. And there's a number of important things that might just immediately kill you. But sometimes you hit part of the brain, it doesn't kill you. But Gage was no longer Gage. Before the accident, oh wait, no, read this. While his wound eventually healed, the Phineas who returned to work was not the Phineas his friends knew. Gage was no longer Gage. Before the accident, Phineas was balanced and dependable. After the accident, his personality underwent a radical shift. Impulsive, he could no longer stick to plans. Irreverent, he began using the grossest profanity and showed little respect for others. Emotionally volatile, he was described as fitful and impatient. His friends and co-workers famously remarked that he was no longer Gage. This observation changed psychology forever. It suggested that personality and morality weren't just soul or spirit, they were biological. So the damage to his brain changed his personality. Like he could still walk and talk and eat and do the ordinary things that people do, but his personality changed. So he used to be a dependable worker who was, by all accounts, a reasonable person and a polite and reasonable person. But afterwards, he became unreliable, he became rude, and he didn't have much self-control afterwards. So the damage to his brain appears to have affected his ability to control himself, and he just became very impulsive. All right, so the neuroscience breakdown. Phineas Gage provides a perfect introduction to how the brain determines behavior. Here are the core concepts his case introduced, right? The concept, localization of function. What it means in Phineas's case. The idea that specific parts of the brain controlled specific behaviors. The rod specifically destroyed his frontal lobe. Right, so this is why we do this. So the frontal lobe is that part. Uh, that's a big part. Basically, like it went through there and then out the top here, right? So it's not the whole frontal lobe. It's kind of like it punched a hole through there. The prefrontal cortex, often called the CEO of the brain, it handles executive functions, planning, inhibition, and social behavior. So this is the part that does the thinking and the decision making, right? So planning, inhibition, and social behavior. And so that was the part that was damaged. And that led to his inability to plan. He became impulsive. He couldn't stick to plans. It affected his inhibition, right? So he became irreverent, he became rude, and he began using the grossest profanities. So he kind of said things that made other people uncomfortable. And social behavior. So he became emotionally volatile. So that he became emotionally unstable. So it affected his ability to control his emotions, right? And then there's also the limbic frontal connection. The accident severed the link between his emotional brain, the limbic system, and his rational brain. He had emotions but no brake system to control them. So like whatever he felt, he immediately acted upon. Like he didn't stop to think about. So maybe like if he was angry, he just started yelling at people, as opposed to thinking about, oh, should I yell at this? Probably shouldn't yell at this guy. So when you have feelings, you think whether you should act on it. But he lost the ability to do that. And here, the limbic system, unfortunately, it doesn't actually show the limbic system because it's the whole thing, right? If we look inside the brain, can I get out of there? The limbic system is most of this. So the model doesn't label the whole thing. So not counting the brain stem, the limbic system is most of this. So the limbic part is like the emotional part, roughly speaking, the emotional part. And the interaction is like you have emotions, you think about the emotions, and then you decide what to do. But because this part was broken, it severed the link between the emotion part and the thinking part. He just immediately acted on his emotions without thinking about it first. So that's basically what happened in very, very simple terms. Okay, so why it matters today. Gage's story taught us that the brain is the physical seat of our identity. When you damage the hardware, the brain tissue, you change the software, the personality. In your course, this serves as a foundation. To understand why people act the way they do, we must first understand the biological machinery driving them. And then we don't care about the question there. So yeah, so this is the basic concept that underlies the neuroscience approach to psychology is that the physical brain determines your behavior. And so like now when you look at any person and maybe they're angry, maybe they're happy, maybe they're sad, maybe they're tired. Like whatever it is that they are doing or thinking or saying, you got to understand that something's going on inside their brains to make them do those things, right? This is like physical neurons happening to make them do those things. And that's the basic concept. And why do I say this is important, right? I have a relative, no names. I have a relative who is greedy, shall we say. He's greedy. He really likes to get stuff. Like he really likes it when he gets things that he doesn't really deserve. He's the kind of person where like if like he gets something on sale, he's happy. Like if he saves money, he's happy. If he finds money that doesn't belong to him, he's happy. If somebody gives him things and he didn't earn it, he's really happy. So he's got this kind of personality, and my mother just cannot deal with it. My mother just cannot deal with greedy people, right? She just can't handle, can't do it, can't do it. And she like tells me all the time, like, why is he like this? He's unbearable, completely unbearable. And so like, yeah, and that's what I mean when I say like your neurology and your psychology really affects your interpersonal relationship, right? Like my mother just can't deal with this person, and I keep trying to tell her, no, but that's how his brain is. It's not like he can control it. It's not like he can change who he is. Like the part of his brain that rewards him for gaining things is just overactive compared to other people. Like it's just that your brain. There's different parts of the brain that controls different parts of your behavior. And if one part is bigger than the other part, then that becomes your dominant personality, right? Some people like are really angry all the time, so the angry part is just overactive compared to the other parts, right? Some people are really good at math for some reason, so the math part is just better than the other part. So like you're depending on which part of your brain is more active than the other parts, that determines your personality. To put it in really like simple terms. So I'm trying to explain to my mother like the part of him that rewards him for gaining things is just overactive. And that's just how he is. He can't help it. He can't help being what he is. And if you understand that, then you can, you know what to do. You know how to handle this. But like you can't reason with him because he doesn't think that way. You can't, say to him, hey, like you don't deserve that. You should probably share that with other people. Like it doesn't, it won't work. You say that to that person, and it just doesn't go through his head, right? Because he doesn't think that way. Anyway, I just wanna, I don't know. So I think like you can handle people a lot better, more effectively, shall we say, if you can understand that psychology. Whereas my mother, as I said, she just can't figure it out, and she is unable to interact with this person in any productive way at all because their personalities clash so badly. But if you, I truly believe, if you understood other people, you can figure out how to deal with them, and you'll be more successful in life, right? If your life requires you to interact with other people, you'll be more successful in those interactions if you understood psychology and neurology. All right, so let's go back to Phineas Gage. I want to ask more about this, right? All right, so the case of how do you spell Phineas Gage demonstrated that the physical brain determines a person's behavior and personality. What exactly did that disprove? What exactly did that disprove? What other theories were there about what determines a person's personality? Uh, and maybe what are still some common misconceptions today about psychology? let's ask about like what are these alternative theories and why they don't explain what happened. All right, so Gemini says the case of Phineas Gage didn't just tell us something new; it actively broke the common sense of the 19th century. To understand why it was such a shock, we have to look at the theories it's crashed into, right? So this is before people really understand just how important the brain is. What did Gage disprove? Before Gage, the prevailing view of the human experience was defined by dualism and holism. Gage's injury acted as a wrecking ball to both. Dualism and holism, right. Cartesian dualism. This was the idea popularized by René Descartes that the mind and the body were two completely different substances. The mind or soul was seen as a non-physical spiritual entity that just happened to inhabit the body, right? So it's a soul is a supernatural thing that inhabits the body. That's dualism. Can we get like a link for this? I don't know if I believe medium. What's Bartleby? Phineas Gage dualism. Dualism claims that the mind is a distinct. Decent essays. I don't know if I believe this either. Alright, so this is locked behind a paywall. But we're asking about disproved theories, so it's not like there's going to be textbook, examples of disproved theories. The challenge, if the soul is spiritual and immortal, how can a piece of metal, a physical object, permanently change a person's morality, temperament, and soul-level character? Gage proved that who we are is tied to physical matter, right? So if you have a soul, and if the soul is independent from the body, then why would the metal rod damage the soul? Right? So, does he have a soul, or is if he does have a soul, it's not the only thing that determines his behavior, right? Because the damage to the brain changed his behavior. Holism, aggregate field theory. Many scientists believed the brain worked like a sponge. If you squeezed one part, the whole thing reacted. They thought the brain was a single, undifferentiated organ where every part did everything. Right. So that was one theory of the brain to challenge. Gage's memory was fine, his speech was fine, his motor skills were fine, only his personality changed. This suggested that the brain is modular. Different parts have different jobs. Very interesting. PMC NIH? Phineas Gage's great legacy. Alright, so these are slightly more respectable references. The first case to suggest the role of brain areas in determining personality, which specific parts of the brain when affected can induce specific mental changes. Alright, good. So these are correct. Two historical rivals, how people explained you. Before neuroscience took the lead, these were the scientific ways people explain personality. Right, theory, the four humors. That's really old. Bodily fluids. So they believed that personality was a balance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much black bile made you melancholic, depressed, right? So the humors thing is really, really old. People don't definitely don't believe that anymore. There was phrenology, skull bumps. Developed by Franz Gall, this science claimed that if you were very benevolent, that part of your brain would grow and create a bump on your skull. Right. So that's interesting because phrenology, they did believe that your brain determined your behavior, but they believed that if you were inclined to be a certain way, that part of your brain would physically grow bigger and you would create bumps on your skull, which is not true. Your skull does not change size or shape unless you have some sort of illness. If you have, like, I don't know, bone cancer in your skull, but otherwise your skull does not change shape. But they did get to the idea that your brain, like parts of your brain, determine your behavior. So that's interesting. So that's kind of close. Vitalism, the spark, the belief that living things contain a vital force distinct from chemistry or physics that governs behavior and life. So this is like the soul theory, the idea that you have an immortal, supernatural soul that controls who you are. All right, number three, common misconceptions today. Even though we've moved past the four humors, modern psychology is still full of neural myths that students often bring into the classroom. Right, the 10% of the brain myth. You've likely heard we only use 10% of our brain. In reality, we use virtually every part of the brain, and most of it is active almost all the time. So that's like a common thing that people think they know. It's actually not true. You use every part of your brain. Left brain versus right brain personalities. The idea that creative people are right-brained and logical people are left-brained is a massive oversimplification. While some functions are lateralized, like language, the two halves are constantly communicating via the callosum. Corpus callosum, my bad. The corpus callosum. So like left brain and right brain is way too simplistic. It's not completely untrue, but it's way too simplistic. Like you use different parts. It's that's not the right side or the left side. You use both sides in different ways. Corpus callosum. We can't find it. Corpus. Oh, I just saw it. I just saw it. There it is. Subcortical white matter structure corpus callosum is that one. Okay, interesting. So this is the part that allows your left side and right side to communicate. Isn't that interesting? So you have like the two halves, and then like at the seam, at the seam between the two halves, you have this thing which connects the two halves and allows communication between the two halves of the brain. Super interesting. Look at that. Right, so the two halves are joined, and they basically communicate with each other all the time. Learning styles, many believe they are strictly visual, auditory, or kinesthetic learners. Research consistently shows that while people have preferences, teaching to a specific style doesn't actually improve learning outcomes. There are certain styles that you enjoy more, but it doesn't change how effective it is, right? Although enjoyment does have an impact, like, because like if you don't enjoy it, then you stop paying attention, and if you don't pay attention, you don't learn anything, right? So like engaging what people enjoy does help them to learn, but it's not because the brain is unable to use the different styles, right? Like you learn visually and auditorily and kinesthetically, like you can do any of these things just perfectly fine. It's whether you are having fun or not. Psychology equals therapy. A huge conception is that psychology is just talking about your feelings or analyzing your childhood. In reality, a huge portion of the field is rigorous biological science, statistics, and experimental research. Yeah. So psychology is different from therapy. Therapy is applied psychology in a way, right? It is applying psychology specifically to help you deal with your traumas, is what therapy is. It is one part of psychology, but psychology is a lot more, right? People are studying the brain. A note on intellectual honesty. It's worth telling your students that the Gage story itself is a bit of a psychological legend. While the personality change was real, some historians argue that later accounts exaggerated his bad behavior to make the scientific point more dramatic. In fact, Gage later moved to Chile and worked as a stagecoach driver, a job that requires significant focus and social skills, suggesting his brain may have practiced neuroplasticity to heal itself over time. Yeah, so this is an important point. I was going to get to that eventually. Is that although immediately after the accident, his personality declined, like he became a bad person, but over time, his brain healed and he recovered some of his self-control. Um, should we get to that right now? Let's get to that right now, since we just talked about it, right? Uh, Tell me what you know about Gage's later life. Um, his brain healed, from what I understand. From what I understand, his brain healed, at least partially, and he managed to become a more balanced person, and he became a more balanced person again. All right, let me let Gemini elaborate on this. The second half of Phineas Gage's life is often left out of textbooks because it is a bit less shocking than the accident itself. But for neuroscientists, it is arguably the most important part of his story. Yeah, yeah. You are absolutely right. The monster described in the immediate aftermath of the accident eventually became a functional working member of society again. So interesting. Not only did the brain damage change his personality, but when his brain healed, it changed it again. It changed it back. It's like the brain healed and he changed back. What? Right, the social recovery of Phineas Gage. After the initial years of being impulsive and no longer Gage, Phineas didn't just wander aimlessly. He actually found a way to rebuild his life through a process modern science called social recovery. Interesting. British Psychological Society, the University of Akron. Alright, yeah, no, looks good. The Chilean Adventure. In 1852, Gage traveled to Chile. For 7 years, he worked as a long-haul stagecoach driver on the rugged mountain trails between Valparaiso and Santiago. Why this matters? This wasn't a simple job. Driving a stagecoach required him to manage six horses at once, follow a strict schedule and plan routes, interact politely with international passengers, exercise extreme focus and emotional control on dangerous narrow roads, right? So driving a stagecoach on mountain roads is not an easy task that a city person can do. So he was brain damaged, but it wasn't but he recovered enough that he could do a complex long-term task, right? Interesting. Uh, Gemini decided to give us a picture of the limbic system from Getty Images. Interesting. Not sure how that helps us. Let's see what Gemini says. How healing happens in the brain. It is unlikely that Gage's brain tissue grew back. I mean, there was a huge hole in his brain. Instead, his recovery was likely a testament to neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. Structure as therapy. Researchers like Malcolm Macmillan argue that the highly structured environment of being a coach driver acted as a form of cognitive rehabilitation. Because his job demanded he be on time and in control, his brain practiced those lost skills until they became natural again. Maybe. I guess, I mean, yeah, sure. The more you use those skills, the more your brain would learn those skills. That's true. I just wonder how much of that is, practice, or if the brain just fixed itself automatically. Compensation? Other parts of his brain, likely in the right hemisphere or the remaining parts of his left frontal lobe, may have stepped up to take over the jobs of the damaged sections, right? So remember, the spike went through the left side. He lost his left eye. It went through the left part, so maybe like the brain functions was rerouted to the right half, and so instead of the damaged half didn't work anymore, but the other half might have compensated by taking over the job that was done by the left half. So that's one possibility. The final chapter. Phineas eventually left Chile and moved to San Francisco in 1859 to live with his mother and sister as his health began to fail. The cause of death, he began suffering from severe epileptic seizures, which were a delayed consequences of the scar tissue in his brain. That's unfortunate. Right, so the brain damage, it didn't heal completely. Eventually, maybe it healed wrong, maybe it's scarred. So it scarred in a way that it caused him epileptic seizures. The final rest, he died on May 21st, 1860, at the age of 36. He died young. He was 25 when the accident happened. He died 11 years later. Maybe with modern science, those seizures could have been controlled. But if the seizures are severe enough, it can kill you, right? Feel like your body seizes up, and if you seize up hard enough, you would die from it. Um, but these days, with more advanced medicine, maybe he could have been saved from the epilepsy. Who knows? The legacy. Years later, Dr. Harlow, his original doctor, convinced Gage's family to exhume his body. His skull and the tamping iron were recovered and given to the Harvard Medical School, where they remain on display today. Fascinating. Do we have a picture of it? We don't have a picture of it there. Do we have a picture of it on display? Where's this? We don't have a picture of it on display. I mean, there he is. Lost his eye, and there's the tamping iron. The fact that Phineas could transition from a child in intellectual capacity, so that was a quote, that his intellectual capacity was reduced to a child. I guess he's throwing tantrums, probably. Transition from a child in intellectual capacity back to a responsible professional shows that the brain is not a static machine, but a dynamic organ that can adapt even after catastrophic damage. Interesting. Alright, so the Royal Society has a video of Phineas Gage. I'm not going to use that. I want to ask, this is like half an hour already, or I mean to ask one more question. This is so interesting to me. I hope it's interesting to you guys as well. So the last thing I want to ask is, it strikes me that the brain injury changed his morality. Changed his morality. At the risk of being unscientific, the story was that he was originally a good person, hardworking, polite, and the brain damage turned him into a bad person. Rude, unreliable. Does that not lead to complications with regard to how we think about morality? Do we choose to be good or evil? Or are we merely the consequences of our physical condition, which we do not control? Oops. Control. Okay, so we're gonna veer off into morality here a little bit, because I'm interested in this, right? It strikes me that the brain injury changed his morality at the risk of being unscientific. The story was that he was originally a good person, hardworking and polite, and the brain damage turned him into a bad person, rude and unreliable. Does that not lead to complications with regard to how we think about morality? Do we choose to be good or evil, or are we merely the consequences of our physical condition, which we do not control? This might be a bit of a tangent, but I think I think I want to address this, right? This is the exact point where neuroscience stops being just about cells and signals and starts being about what it means to be human. You've hit on the central tension of neuroethics. It's complicated. The story of Phineas Gage forces us to confront a heavy possibility that what we call character or soul might actually be the output of a biological machine. Right? Like your character, your person. That's just your brain, and you don't control your brain. Right? The broken break theory of morality. In neuroscience, we often look at morality through the lens of inhibition. Most of us have bad impulses, anger, greed, or the urge to say something rude. However, a healthy prefrontal cortex, PFC, acts like a sophisticated brake system. Yeah, that's what we want to believe. So the prefrontal cortex, if you go back, is can I can I get out of this? Back to the brain. So this is the prefrontal cortex, as we said. So your emotions come to here, and you kind of pause and think about your emotions before you act on them. In Gage's case, his engine, his emotions and survival instincts, was still running, but his brakes, the PFC, the prefrontal cortex, was physically severed. The scientific view, Gage didn't decide to be rude. He lost the physical ability to inhibit his impulses. Right? He didn't choose to be a bad person. He didn't choose to be rude to his coworkers. Like he lost the ability to not be rude. Interesting. That changes everything, doesn't it? Like if somebody's rude to you, like did they really choose to be rude, or did they just were not unable to control their feelings and they just let it out? Like did they choose to let it out, or were they unable to let it out, or unable to not let it out? Right? The moral complication: if a person's rudeness is caused by a physical lesion, can we morally blame them? If a car with no brakes hits a pedestrian, do we call the car evil or do we call it broken? Yeah. And so, like, spoiler alert, after we learn about neuroscience and psychology, you will look at crimes completely differently. A lot of crimes are committed by people who are broken. Right? They're not evil, they're broken. They are unable to stop themselves. It's not like they choose, well, sometimes. On rare occasions, somebody just chooses to be bad. Sometimes that happens, but most of the time, most crimes are committed by broken people and not actually evil people. I'm not saying evil doesn't exist, it does exist. But it's a lot more rare than you might imagine. Most of the time, they're broken and not evil. Biological determinism versus free will. Your question touches on biological determinism, the idea that our actions are dictated by our physical brain state, which we didn't choose, right? So the traditional moralist perspective is that we have a will that sits above the brain. We choose to be good despite our impulses. So that's what we think, right? And that's how you experience it, by the way. Most of you, like you have all these urges. You wanna eat more, you wanna sleep more, you wanna play video games or whatever it is. And like you control that. Like you know I have to do my chores, I have to go to work, I have to do my homework, right? I can't just play video games all day. I have these other things I have to do. I don't have enough money. I have to go to work, earn money. So you have this part of your brain that controls the other part of the brain, right? There's a part of the brain that just want to do whatever. And then there's the other part that tells it, no, you gotta do these things instead. And that's how you experience it. And traditionally, people think that, you have like they're different things. But it's really just your brain. It's just different parts of your brain, right? So strict neurodeterminist perspective believes that free will is an illusion caused by the brain, that we are just a collection of chemical reactions. So there is one side of the argument that argues that free will does not exist and that everything is deterministic. The modern neuroscientific perspective is that we have constrained agency. Our biology sets the boundaries, but our environment and our plastic brain allows us to learn and adapt. Yeah, but that's not. Okay, so I'm a strict neurodeterminist. Yes, your brain can learn and adapt, by which we mean your brain physically changes form. to change behavior, but but the behavior is still a consequence of the form of the brain. By the form, I mean it's the neurons and how they connect it. That determines your behavior. And I do not believe you really have free will. Not really. Your brain can learn and grow and change, but you don't really choose. You don't, I mean, you don't really choose. Your brain will respond the way it does respond. That's what the neurodeterminist thinks. So this is unresolved at the moment. The evidence points towards deterministic brains, but it goes against our experiences. Like we don't like to think that we are deterministic. We like to think that we have free will. So people don't like that idea, but all the evidence points towards us not having free will actually. But let's save that for later, right? So number three, the neural law dilemma. Okay, so this is also a dilemma. This isn't just a 19th century problem, it's a massive issue in modern courts. There are documented cases of people who suddenly develop deviant or criminal interests, only for doctors to find a tumor pressing against their prefrontal cortex. When the tumor was removed, the immoral behavior vanished. This leads to a terrifying question. How many bad people are actually just injured or malfunctioning people? Oh, this is great, right? So, like, a person, a normal person, an ordinary, unremarkable person, starts becoming interested in crimes and like all sorts of heinous crimes. And then they go see a doctor, and the doctor finds a brain tumor. They remove the brain tumor, and they're no longer interested in crimes. So a person gets a brain tumor, becomes a criminal. You remove the brain tumor, they stop being a criminal. So what is a crime? So they're not bad people. They just have a brain tumor. Right? They're just malfunctioning. That's true. That happens. It's a true thing that happens. So here's a thing that okay, one thing that is important for you to know. If you've known somebody for a long time and they're relatively stable, and then you notice their personality change, or like their behavior changes, and you can't explain it rationally, you should take them to a doctor and you should get them a brain scan because they might have a brain tumor. Like if you have no way, like if somebody just changes their behavior, right? Like if somebody like any sort of behavioral change that you can't explain, ask a neuroscientist. Like ask a brain doctor because they might have a tumor. Um, or they might be getting old. So when you get old and your brain starts to decline, like you start getting dementia, your behavior will change then as well. But that's just dementia, right? So when people get old, their personality can change. Or if you get a brain tumor, your personality can change. So if you know somebody whose behavior changes, and you know they didn't used to be like that, and you can't explain why, you might want to take them to a doctor just to check their brains, right, for a tumor. All right, number four, the hopeful side, morality as a skill. If we go back to Gage's later life in Chile, we find a counter-argument to the idea that we are merely victims of our biology. Gage's recovery suggests that morality is also a habit. I don't know if that's true. By working as a stagecoach driver, he was forced to practice being good, being on time, controlling his temper with passengers, and following rules. He likely used neuroplasticity to build new detours around his damaged brain. This suggests that while our physical condition determines our starting point, our environment and our efforts can retrain the brain. We might not have total free will, but we have free want, the ability to train our brains to stop certain impulses. I'm not sure if that's true. To some extent, I think his brain just healed naturally because like any injury will heal, including brain injuries. Your brain will try to heal as best as can. I think his brain just healed and it just reconnected his limbic system to the prefrontal cortex. I don't know if his training made any difference. It might be just a natural healing process. Just, brain, oh, it's broken. So it tries to reconnect itself. And then once it reconnected itself, he functioned again. Because, like, I don't know to what extent he controlled it, or and to what extent it just happened automatically, right? But anyway, so like your brain can change in a way that makes you a criminal, but it can also change in a way that makes you a better person. It happens less commonly. Sometimes you can get a brain tumor that gives you superpowers. It happens less commonly. Most of the time, you get a brain tumor, it makes you a bad person, or you just get sick and die. But on very rare occasions, like a brain tumor can improve your memory, or like improve your math, improve your ability to do math. It's extremely rare, but it's possible. Your brain's crazy. Like all sorts of things happen in your brain. How this fits your course. This is a perfect philosophy of mind module for your students. You can ask them if Phineas Gage committed a crime after his accident. Should he have been sent to a prison or a hospital? Yeah, fascinating. Fascinating. I mean, prisons still kind of make sense. Like, if a person is going to do harm to other people, you should stop them from doing harm to other people. And if that requires locking them up in a prison, then that's what it takes, right? Like, if you just can't control their behavior, if they can't control their behavior, and you need them to like stop harming others, then you lock them up. Okay, fine. But he should also get like medical help. And in fact, like anybody who commits a crime, you should probably give them a brain scan to check for tumors. And you should probably take them to a psychologist or psychiatrist to have this, to have the mental state analyzed. A lot of like criminal cases, they don't do psychological assessments, and I don't know why. I think every criminal case should get a psychological assessment, and even just a brain scan. Like every criminal case should get a brain scan because you never know, right? On the one hand, if it turns out that they don't have any problem with the brain, okay, they're the bad person, knock them up. Or if they do have a problem with the brain, then you fix the problem and they're fixed and you don't have to do anything else to them. I just think it makes more sense, right? That's what I think. Okay, so this video is 50 minutes or so. I'm gonna end this video here. So that's just Phineas Gage. This is the case study to start us off. But already we've got some very, very interesting concepts, right? The idea that the physical brain determines your behavior. And that if you change your brain, you would change your behavior. Like your brain is just a machine and you are just a machine. Like your behavior is just a machine. And if you change the parts, the machine changes. And it behaves differently. That's modern psychology. That is neuroscience. All right, let me end this here. We'll continue next time. We're gonna dive deep into the science. All right, see you next time.